Hello, everybody. This is Tosca at NGO Soul+Strategy. I have to tell you that I personally don't have a lot of background in the field of fundraising and resource mobilization, but for a while now, I felt that I need to learn more about it. And this happened when I started to work more with fundraisers. And now I've been asked for some speaking engagements with fundraisers, for instance, at the International Fundraising Congress. So I felt it was time for me to invite Erica to the show. And my guest today, Erica Waasdorp, and I'm pronouncing that her last name as we would say it in Dutch. We were introduced to each other thanks to my colleague Mary Beth McIntyre, who is one of my collaborators with also a deep expertise in fundraising. And I'm grateful that Mary Beth introduced me to Erica. Erica and I both are Dutch. And we both have lived in the US for a long time now. So we have that in common as well, which is really fun. And so you may hear very similar accents in this interview. Not sure about that, but we'll see. And whether you'll see some of our infamous Dutch directness or not is also to be seen. So Erica is the president of the consulting agency, A Direct Solution, a consulting agency for direct marketing by nonprofits and NGOs to donors, particularly, I imagine, small donors. We'll talk about that. She also is, very importantly, a specialist in monthly giving as a donor strategy, as well as in international fundraising for 20 years or more, no less. So, Erica, welcome.
Welcome. Thanks, Tosca. Really excited to be here today.
That's good. I'm pumped about this too. So Erica, besides being the owner of A Direct Solution, as a consulting agency, is also an author, a speaker. She's a master trainer affiliated with the AFP. Does that stand for Association for Fundraising Professionals?
Yes, yes.
That's an American agency, correct?
American, yep. Yeah, American and Canadian, yep.
And Canadian, North American. Okay. Erica, is also a U.S. ambassador for the International Fundraising Congress, or IFC, that I just mentioned, which I had the pleasure of attending for the first time last year. And this year, together with two other women, I will present a mini masterclass and several conference sessions at the conference.
That's great.
Thank you. Before launching A Direct Solution, Erica held several other consulting, coaching, and direct marketing roles in consulting agencies, nonprofits, and in the publishing sector. So, Erica, I kind of in a nutshell, gave a definition of your consulting agency. Tell me, what more should our audience know about your agency, what you offer?
That's really pretty much it. I mean, I work with organizations of all different sizes, small,
Okay.
mid-size, large, and helping them grow their fundraising revenue.
Okay. And we're going to talk more particularly about one of those vehicles in a moment. But just to kind of set the scene, in your view, because you've been operating in, and also observing this field, particularly in America, but also to some extent international fundraising trends, how is the field of direct giving by small donors and the field of monthly giving, particularly, how has that changed in the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, great question. It has changed a lot.
Has it?
So I've actually been working in, what we call like recurring donors, sustainers, monthly givers. I mean, those are all the same thing, really. I mean, everybody uses a different term, but I mean, that has changed a lot. Like when I started 31 years ago,
Yeah.
it was all about getting donors to start giving monthly by mail or
Okay,
by
of
phone.
course. But by phone
By
as well.
phone. I mean, there was a couple of organizations that were starting with like what they call like face-to-face fundraising, street fundraising, right? On at malls or and on the streets. That started coming up. Direct response television started coming up a little bit in those years, talking since 1993. But it really blossomed since the introduction of online giving,
Mm,
online donation pages. I mean, when I wrote my first book in 2012, online giving, there was no payment platforms that allowed for recurring gifts. Now
right.
that is every single system has that built in.
Yeah.
So in the old days, it was also more expensive, right? It took longer, because you can only do mail and phone. Now it's like literally you can create an email and you can link to a donation page and you can start asking for one-time gifts and you can start asking for recurring gifts. The platforms are there. So the tools have really made life a lot easier for nonprofits of
Yeah,
all
yeah.
sizes.
And you
Yeah.
mentioned direct response TV. I mean, I
Yeah.
never watch TV anymore. I only watch things streaming
Yeah.
basically on my devices. But I'm kind of intrigued that they still exist. So these are for our audience. These are kind of short uh, television ads basically to give, right? But you still see them to some extent.
Yeah,
To
they're
whom
called
do they
connected.
appeal?
Yeah. Yeah, they're called connected TV now. So on the streaming, there's like companies that offer those services where you can literally have an ad
Okay.
on a streaming service. So
Yeah, those
so
of
they
course
they
happen
call
as
it
well.
connected TV. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's still
And
some DRTV as well, so or YouTube, so lots of TV
YouTube,
op
that's
YouTube
right.
is a great tool as well, which is
Yeah.
technically not TV, but it is in a way an ad as well, right? It's a commercial, talking
Yeah.
about the problem and how the donor can solve that problem.
Yeah, or at least contribute to
Yeah.
solving. Yeah, and I just want to say to our listeners, an important caveat as we start this conversation is Eric and I are talking only about the kind of giving to formally registered nonprofits, right, and
Hmm.
philanthropic organizations. We're not talking in this interview about the equally important kind of dimension of informal support that citizens give to each other at the local level, within their neighborhood, within their communities, etc. Forms of mutual aid. Very, very important, but not the topic for today.
Hmm.
So I want to unpack a little bit further these trends and what you have seen happening and evolving when it comes to different categories of givers, particularly here in the US then. Um, how about, I've seen some research on the giving behaviors of religious versus non-religious donors, and that religious people in general tend to be more generous. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's a great point. Religious donors tend to give more often. They're used to, I mean, some religions are used to what they call tithing, right? So where they give
Mhm.
regular amounts specific amounts on a regular basis. And so there's that relationship of wanting to give back to the community as well, so I think that's a big factor. But having said that, I mean, if we look at the fact that you know the number of religious donors is dwindling,
Declining.
is declining. So yeah, a lot of it is like coming from non-religious donors as
Of
well.
course,
So
of course.
yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, when we talk about what you just said, Erica, is that true for uh, all forms of faith? So is it true for people who are Muslim? Is it true for people who are Hindu, Buddhist, and not just for Christians,
Y-
what you just said? Do you
Yeah, I'm
happen to
not
know those trends?
to be honest, I'm not sure how what the regular giving is within those religions like Hindu or Islam, but I mean more Christian
Mm,
based religions. I mean, donors are very comfortable giving on a regular basis. So they're comfortable giving because it's just part of basically how they've been taught
how they've been
to
taught.
give
Yeah.
back, right? So yeah.
And but they're giving to their
Their
church,
church, yep.
Muslim temple, etc.
Yes.
Is core to that, right?
Yeah.
Is there giving to causes outside their religion? Is it equally stronger than those people who are not who don't declare themselves to be religious?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's general, like, it's part of like the sort of I wouldn't call it a culture, but it's more like, yeah, I mean, you're asked on a regular basis to give even outside of your church, right? So, and again, I don't have the study in front of me, but I have seen that religious donors tend to give more, pretty substantially more, in some cases, to other,
to other
especially
causes.
human services types
Mm,
of organizations, but that could also mean international development,
yeah.
missions, so those are pretty common. And I work
Just
with a
for
couple
our
of sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Erica, just for our audience, the parts of our audience that might not be familiar with missions, and frankly, I was one of them coming from Holland, where that
Yeah.
is, as you know, is not. What are missions?
So, well, a lot of times it's like in Africa they have missions. So they're still trying to expand either the Christian faith or religion, Catholic faith in certain areas where religion is not that common yet,
Of that kind, at least.
of that kind. So you might, have somebody, a priest or a pastor coming from Africa or a country in Africa that comes to, our church, who's explaining what's happening in their community.
Yeah.
And again, and as religious folks, we want to obviously spread our religion, right? So, in many cases, so that's like, so they're literally like, as missionaries trying to expand the faith
Mm.
in those areas where they want to,
Yeah. Now that's
grow.
fairly,
Yeah.
at least in the world of INGOs,
Yes.
that is fairly controversial, whether that's a good thing to do. But what I've noticed here in the US is that citizens, members of certain, I've seen it in the Christian community at least,
Yeah.
they go on mission trips,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
As not
Yeah.
just as religious professionals, but as
As
members of
yes.
churches, and
Yeah. Do
that's
good. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's something that is both controversial in some quarters, and I would say I have some reservations about that as well. But it's a lot more common in American Christian denominations.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just want to make sure that we were clear to our audience
Hmm.
on what that is. So I it was also years ago that I saw some interesting data on giving differences in terms of generosity across class, so across income and wealth, in Europe as well as here. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, and again, I don't have the research in front of me, but it's interesting that, a lot of times, I mean, you would expect people who have a lot of wealth, who own a lot of property, that they give more.
Yeah, you would
But in
expect that.
essence, it's like typically comes from the middle class folks, if you will. They actually give more. If you look at like, the trends is like how much
Proportions.
more so, and even some people who, don't have a lot of money. It's kind of like the widow's mite message, right? Where you're like, okay, well, even a couple of pennies is appreciated, and they may be more, beneficiaries at times, but then they want to give back as well. So, but yeah, typically it's like, and again, people ask me all the time, oh, let's find a couple of rich donors, right? And the reality is, like, when you then ask them, they may have a particular number of nonprofits that they support,
Yeah,
and they're not necessarily willing to expand their giving, as
yeah.
opposed to like some folks that are, have more, median, well, like modest means, if you will.
Mhm.
They want to help, so that middle classes tends to give more money than
Yeah. And
rich
in fact,
people.
that data that I saw at the time said that those people who are of low to middle income
Yeah.
are much in proportion much more generous
Yes.
than richer people, which I thought was a really important data point
Hmm.
to remember. What can you say about trends you've seen in international giving, so to international causes, at least amongst American small donors?
Well, so obviously we have a war going on in Ukraine. I mean, we
Yeah.
have situation in Gaza, Israel. So though and like hunger situation, famine situation in Africa, some African countries, and civil wars in some countries. So donors are very much motivated by those things that they see in the news, and they want to help.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even if you look at what happened in Haiti, I mean, again, so people are like, okay, well, hey, it's almost a little bit of like rage giving or outrage giving, like saying, okay, well, I really see something bad happening, and I wanna help.
Yeah.
So some of the international relief organizations have seen actually an increase in giving because
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
Um, so
I know, and I'm a small donor of one of those, and I could imagine that. Now, let me pivot to the topic of monthly giving, which you're
mhm.
an expert on. How long ago was monthly giving introduced as an instrument for donors?
Yeah, it's been actually I read some article somewhere, and I don't remember exactly, but it's been a long, long time. Even well before like the 50s or
Oh,
60s. I mean,
really?
yeah, it's been around for a long time, where again, some of the international relief organizations, especially, they started with sponsorship programs.
Hmm. Child
That was
sponsorship, you mean?
child sponsorship programs. Yep. And then you had animal organizations that started with animal
Ah,
sponsorship,
yeah.
gifts. And then it pivoted more to like, recurring gifts, that where again they did not need that one-on-one relationship,
Yeah.
because that was very resource intensive, right? Now it was like, okay, you can give a monthly gift, and you're supporting this community, or you're supporting people in this community, but you're not necessarily having to have that one-on-one child sponsor
Yeah, and you're
relationship with.
saying it's
Yes,
resource and intensive.
intensive.
The
Yes,
nonprofits to maintain those linkages
yes.
between specific quote unquote beneficiaries and specific donors
Right.
is a
But they
labor.
still exist. I mean, child sponsorships still exist,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but a lot of organizations have like, have pivoted to more like general ongoing, support with
Support.
smaller recurring gifts that are, again, that are more convenient to the donor, that may not quite be at the level. Because child sponsorships tend to be more expensive. They're like usually between $30 and $35 a month, as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to the average monthly gift right now is about $24 a month across
Mm,
all different organizations. But
interesting.
I saw a study recently from a database company, and they saw that, the people that they looked at, all of those data, it was $79 a month. So again, there's this huge variation, right, in terms of what is an average gift for a particular organization. It's all over the map.
Yeah. So, and again, just because our audience is global, for
Yeah,
those who've never heard of the term monthly giving, can I summarize? Can I
sure.
define it?
Yeah.
Erica, tell me if I'm wrong. It's basically that an individual donor commits on a monthly basis, often based on a credit card payment
Or
that is
bank.
automatically, or bank transfer that's automatically happening, commits to giving a defined amount per month until the donor indicates that they want to stop that, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And of course, um, just to be clear, why is the monthly giving model, Erica, why are nonprofits so keen on this?
Why are they not, or where are
No,
they?
why are they so
Oh,
keen
okay.
on
Well,
this
yeah. Well,
vehicle? Yeah.
they should be keen on it, because it provide you with that sustainable revenue. It's
Mm-hmm.
money that you can count on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and it grows pretty substantially. If you look at like, just even say you have 100 donors, and they give you 25 bucks a month, that's $300 a year. So now, yeah, those 100 donors are giving you $30,000 a year that you can count on.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's just like you can plan on the money to be there. And again, these donors also, they stay with you. They give monthly for at least on average 8 years.
8 years is the average.
8 years.
Impressive. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, I mean, you've got, a lot, $240,000 that you can count on for the
Yeah.
next 8 years. So you can really identify what are your needs, what can you spend money on, because you know that money keeps coming in from these
Yeah.
credit card folks, right? So,
Yeah.
or these bank folks. So I think that's a really, really important reason. And I think the other thing is, in the US, a lot of organizations look at an organization like Charity Water, who
Mm-hmm.
is very, active internationally, and they they made a conscious decision in 2015 to say, we get all these one-time donors. It's all great, but it's like really hard there's a lot of churn in those one-time donors. We have to keep, it's like almost like you're a hamster in a hamster
Yeah.
wheel, right?
Yeah.
You have to constantly be running, 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 running to bring these new one-time donors in and then try to upgrade them to higher levels, as opposed to if you can say, look, we're going for these ongoing monthly donors. It's again, it sort of gives you that breathing room where you can say, okay, I can, I don't have to run as fast because I know this money keeps coming in. So that's
Mm-hmm.
really why that has grown tremendously. It's like that, but it is a long-term focus, right? It's
Yeah.
really a move from short-term to long-term focus
Yes.
because,
Yes. I'm now tempted, but I'm going to
Mhm.
resist that temptation to go into, since you mentioned Charity Water, I
Yeah.
have very mixed feelings about
Yeah, no, I know there's some issues with that, but
some of
but
that, but
it but
that's
it's
not the topic of this
yeah, the
podcast episode.
principle of it is like
Yeah.
they, as an organization, made the conscious decision
Yeah.
to pivot the long term, which is, I think that's more relevant is like that you must want to pivot. You must want to go for it. You can't just do it half nilly, willy-nilly, half, baked. You need to go for it because it
To
is
really commit.
it is a little bit more of a time investment,
I
not so much money per se, but it's a little bit more time investment
For the
to
nonprofit, you
for the
mean?
nonprofit
Oh,
to grow monthly donors rather than just say, okay, well, let's just keep these one-time donors
why is
going.
that?
Again, you need to work with your system. You need to, I mean, it's a slower growth, if you will. I mean, if you're
Hmm.
sending an email asking for a one-time gift, you get more responses than if you send an email
Yeah.
for a monthly
Yeah. I
gift,
could
right? So
imagine that.
so it's a slower growth, but it's definitely growing for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
fact,
And
it based on some research I saw just the other day, it's like it grew by 6% last year. Online monthly giving
I'm glad to hear
grew,
that.
yeah, grew by 6% as opposed to some of the other one-time online giving went down.
Yeah, I saw that
So
too.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. And I myself, because I have some knowledge of the sector, I've been a monthly donor to several organizations for a while. The interesting thing for me, by the way, is that on the institutional fundraising side, especially in the international NGO community, there's a big push to really for institutional donors, foundations, and bilaterals, etc., to give much more core, flexible, long-term funding. Right, they can go to core operating support and so on. So in a way, the monthly giving model is the equivalent for small donors.
Hmm.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, are there particular hurdles that NGOs and nonprofits have to overcome when they want to persuade donors to turn to monthly giving?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, to be honest, I mean, again, I've been doing this for a long time. So what I run into a lot, especially with leadership, is the okay, we need to pivot to that long-term focus.
Yeah.
Whereas there's like, okay, but we also need to raise that one-time revenue, right? So it's a constant struggle that's going on. And I even find it with organizations and clients that I work with that they say they want to go sustainer first, as they call it, or like monthly giving first, and then but then, oh, by the way, but we got to get this one-time giving revenue in, or we got to generate a certain net revenue by the end of the year, right? So
It's a
it's a
target.
constant balancing act.
Good
So I
one.
think that's the biggest hurdle from an organization point of view. I think the other piece is like not assigning like a driver of the program is, again, I mean, you can't, monthly giving is not something that is just something you do in, say, January, and then you're done with it for the rest of the year. It's a constant planting of the seeds.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the tools are there. You have your social media, you have your emails, you have your mailings, you may have some phone calls, you may have some texting, so there's a lot of these different things where you can plant the seeds on it, but you have to want to build it in, right? And I
Mm.
think that's the thing. So there's a lot of little things that you can do, adding 2 buttons in every email, or things like that. One asks for a one-time gift, one goes ask for a monthly gift. But sometimes organizations are hesitant to test those things.
Mm.
And this is where, again, I'm in this field all day, right? I look at these tests and it's like, okay, look, if some of these bigger organizations are testing this and continue to do this, guess what? It must be working for them, right? So why not try it? So I think that's like a hurdle sometimes. But again, because it is that long term that, again, the nonprofit fundraisers, the folks that are trying to get campaigns out the door, they're constantly like, again, balancing like, oh yeah, no, but I need to get these emails out because I need to get this one-time gift, or I have a match today and I got to get $30,000 in the door. So
Mm.
as opposed to, hey, how can we generate some monthly donors? So I think that's it. And sometimes it's also a matter of like targeting the right donors.
How
So
so?
monthly donors come from smaller donors, like people who give less than $250 as a one-time gift, usually.
Okay.
You may have some bigger donors that say, oh, okay, yeah, I want to do $100 a month, or what have you, but that's typically not the main target group. So these are your smaller donors to begin
Yeah.
with, that you say,
Yeah.
hey, you can make a difference with an amount that you're comfortable with, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's like, so targeting helps with that big picture, short and long term
Yeah.
revenue
Interesting.
focus. Yeah, so I
In
think that's a big factor. And I think the other thing is like coming up with the right, like what we call like the story or the nudge or the value proposition.
yeah.
So what is it that pushes a donor to say, hey, I'm now ready to make a monthly gift. And this all ties in with, what kind of stories are you telling? Do they trust the organization? Do they think that, if you give them your credit card information or your bank account information, do they think that you're going to be, safeguarding that
Safe
information,
from a
right?
cyber fraud perspective, and
Yes,
yeah.
yeah. So it's
Yeah.
all anything that it impacts general fundraising, and it
Yeah.
impacts monthly giving as
Yeah.
well.
I'm now getting so interested, but I know we can't talk about that
Yeah.
in this interview, but in how those behaviors um, differ or not across cultures, national cultures, because of course we know that philanthropy and giving in the form of community foundations, as well as public and private foundations, etc., and government bilateral spending has been increasing a lot outside the global north. So in other
Hmm.
regions of the world, right, a lot,
Hmm.
and it's
Yep.
increasingly important. But again, I'm tempted to go there, but we won't. I am interested. Just you mentioned the value proposition, so as I mentioned when we were preparing for this interview, I'm interested in the kind of applied research on influencing and persuasion. how it relates to leadership and leadership development, but as it relates to giving, how do fundraisers and resource mobilize, how do they use research findings on what motivates people, what persuades people to give when they were not inclined before? How do they, what do they use, and what is this thing about value proposition?
Yeah, so I think a big factor in, sometimes it sounds simple, but it may not always be as simple, but sometimes it's as like even kind of taking a look and saying, okay, well, I have a donor base. What do I know about my donors? Have I ever talked to them and
Mm,
asked them, hey Tosca, why are you giving monthly to XYZ organization? And that's a lot of times is sort of an eye opener for the organizations, but it's also will then help create a value proposition. Like, okay, well, if you're telling me you give monthly because it's a way that you can spread your giving across like the many organizations that you want to support, right?
mm-hmm,
That could be like, okay, well, maybe there's other donors out there that also want to do the same, right?
mm-hmm.
So, because it's not a lot of research as to what are the typical, like how many monthly gifts does a donor make? It all depends. Sometimes it's like if you look at animal welfare charities, for example, some donors might have 6 or 7 monthly gifts,
Hmm.
right? Because they love animals and they're giving to every animal organization, right?
Yeah.
So again, it's all over. There's not one answer in that regard. But I think it's starting with like asking your donors why they're giving and what motivates them
Mm.
to step up. That helps with the value proposition. And obviously again, it's like what are you indicating? What's the story that you're telling the donor? Uh, how can the donor help with a solution? And again, a big donor might say, yes, I'm going to give you $1,000, $5,000. A smaller donor might say, okay, well, the minimum I can do is $25 a month, but I want to help you create that solution, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more as a next question around storytelling.
mhm,
What kind of stories and whose stories do we tell? As we were talking about in the international NGO community, there's a lot of emphasis now on what kind of narratives do we use? Is it strength-based? Is it deficit-based, right? Ethical storytelling from a program participant perspective, using photographers from the country or region,
mhm.
etc., and not Western photographers or global people from the global north, etc. To what extent does that at all is there how does that play up in your field of work? And is there a tension between that drive towards a different storytelling, as I just described, and what motivates the average, at least American donor?
Yeah, I mean, again, I have those discussions a lot where, somebody starts with, here's the complete story, and thank you, thank you, thank you, you've made this possible, and now give me more, which, so as opposed to saying, okay, well, and it's a smiling picture, like happy, happy, hey, you've made this possible, which is really the place for that is in the thank you process in the newsletter where you're saying, okay, because of your monthly support, this is what happened, right? So we have this complete story that's like the impact you've made is as part of your thank you process in your ongoing stewardship is like, hey, your monthly giving makes this possible, as opposed to when you're first trying to invite a donor to make a gift,
Yeah.
it needs to be an incomplete story.
Is that what
And
you call it?
yeah,
Incomplete versus.
we call it an incomplete story. So it's like, okay, there's still a problem there. Is that tension? It's like, okay, it's almost like, hey, the donor reads and like, oh, okay, how can I make this person feel better? Or how can I give food? Or how can I, help this dog or whatever the story is.
Yeah.
And like with that gift, that's the outcome that I want to achieve, but the outcome has not yet happened, as opposed to,
Right.
again, and it's a constant battle, if you will, like with okay, you know, everybody wants to tell the complete story, but that does not work as well in raising funds or generating monthly
I
gifts,
see. So
because
no,
it's like
no
it's not, you know, what's a donor going to do? Or the other thing that happens a lot is like organizations, they have these huge numbers on their website. Oh, we just got $800,000 or whatever, or like, hey, we were able to help 5 million people last
reach,
year.
beneficiary
The
reach. Yeah.
right? And it's like, okay, well, so how is my $10 a month going to make a difference? You already, you don't need me, you know. So I think that's that tension. And I sometimes again battle with people saying, well, you know, hey, let's not talk about, you've already helped, like you know, we've already been able to help XYZ number of millions of people. It's like, no, 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 no. I need to help this one person right now that
Yeah.
needs a safe home, or that needs, you know, food, or needs to feed her kids, or whatever it is, right? So again, it's like one story that
It's so
the
interesting
donor
because, yeah.
wants to help this one person. And again, sometimes people are like, oh yeah, no, but it's like about 50,000 people. And it's like, oh my God, how can I make a difference of 50,000 people? It's like it becomes this huge problem that
Mm,
I feel overwhelmed as a donor. And I'm like, I don't think my $10 or $25 is not going to make a difference. So I might decide not to give because it's just too much, you know.
mm.
So again, it's that fine line
It
between
is.
telling the story of
Woo.
one person that I can, hey, you know, my $25 a month can do this right now. You know, I can make
Yeah.
sure that this woman has food for her kids, you know. So
Yeah, yeah. Really, I'm glad I asked the question. So there's some real areas of, at the very least, a very fine balance, as you said, a balancing act, a
mhm,
tightrope to be walked,
right.
uh, around the incomplete versus the complete story, to use the terminology
Yeah.
that you introduced us to, but also on the outcome side. So when nonprofits and NGOs are more and more wanting to prove that they have outcomes to show for, and that they have reached so many people, no matter whether from an evaluation perspective that is a squishy number or
hmm
a meaningful number or a not so meaningful number, but there's some real balancing acts to
hmm
be made there. I'm
Yeah.
glad I asked that question. Now, another question I had was around, so we've seen this whole growth in the last 8 to 15 years in what some people call intermediary nonprofit and NGO ranking and rating sites, right? So
hmm
here in the US, we have, for instance, Charity Navigator. Some other countries have something equivalent. We have Giving Well, we have a whole bunch. And those sites, those platforms are based on the premise that small donors actually want actual data
hmm
on what is the effectiveness and the efficiency and
right.
so on, and what's the overall the health of the organizational culture, what are their diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, etc., etc. The research that I once looked at, it's too long ago now to be relevant, but I'm curious whether you know, says that actually while donors say they want that access to that data to inform their choices of giving, most donors actually give based on what I call their belly, their gut. You know, my friends are giving, my family is giving, or I see people in my network talk about this.
hmm
What's your sense of how important are data or not?
Yes. Again, it's like it depends a little bit, obviously, on the type of donor, right? So, but usually the smaller donors, to your point, they get motivated by that story, that emotion that is being created when they get that letter or they get that email or the postcard. It's more probably relevant when you talk about asking potential new donors, right? So if they don't know the organization yet,
Mm,
some of the newer donors, and I think I saw a study like 76% of prospective donors goes to some of these sites, or at least checks out the organization's website. Like, are they legitimate? What do they can I trust them? Again, it's all about trust, right?
Yeah.
Can I, are they spending the money wisely? So this is where the numbers come into play, right? And having like the Candid logo, Guide Star Candid or Charity Navigator is important. But ultimately, they get something in the mail and they're like, oh yeah, I think this is a great cause. Hey, their website looks good. Let me make a gift, right now because I really think I can make a difference to this, whatever the story is about, right? So,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's important in terms, again, that trust building. Hey, there's transparency there. Again, a
Yeah.
lot of donors want to make sure that their money doesn't go to waste, but that they're showing the transparency. But again, it's all about like, how old is a charity, how young is a charity, sometimes in terms of what do those numbers look like, what percentage is spent on administration or fundraising. I mean, you get all of that impact discussion, and the
Well,
uncharitable
and
and all that
the
stuff, right?
treacherous area of overhead myths, etc.,
Yes,
which we
yes,
will not go into, but
yes, right,
which
yes,
thankfully that myth is being weakened now, finally,
right,
that
yes,
norm. But
right,
yeah, we want to be careful with that.
yeah,
Okay, Erica, we need to move towards the end. So I have
yeah.
one more question for you. And
Hmm.
that is about intergenerational differences in giving behaviors, right? So a while ago, well, this was when I was still an accidental academic, for a little while, for a few years, I made some small contributions to some research, of qualitative research on how the behaviors of generation Y and Z, and even going back to millennials, how their inclination to give, according to other researchers, has really changed. In a
Hmm.
nutshell, that younger generation voters don't want to be told by nonprofits when to give, how much to give, when to write a letter to an authority, when to show up on the streets, etc. They don't want to be broadcasted to in a one-directional way by
Hmm.
nonprofits. They want to be in a bi-directional, in a two-way communication, and they want to give on their own terms, whether it's
Hmm.
their money, their time, their talent,
Hmm.
etc. Right?
Yeah.
Um, is this something that you have seen happening as a practitioner or not? And how is that impacting the field of direct marketing, direct giving, and monthly giving?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, a lot of younger generations, they're used to subscriptions.
Hmm.
So that has really, you know, again, helped with the growth of monthly giving as a whole
Yeah,
because the younger generations are more comfortable with that.
yeah.
They're more comfortable giving their credit card or their bank account information and do those subscriptions. So there's actually terms like, subscriptions for good or benevolent subscriptions now, as opposed to like recurring gifts or monthly gifts, right?
Mm,
Um, but obviously the benefits are, again, they want to be more part of a community, to your point is,
yes.
but again, they
The
they do want to
networks.
get feedback on how their gifts are making a difference. They do want to be engaged in the organization. They want to get invited to, like, town halls from the leadership, or even have people in the field and saying, hey, I'm right here, like here's how your monthly gifts are making a difference, right?
Like a
And
short
again,
video
short
or
video, things like
mhm.
that. So a lot of, things that younger generation is more comfortable with social media, like, and seeing sort of the more immediate impact of their
Yeah.
giving, is
And they want
tends
to
to be.
also,
Yes.
is that right? They want to broadcast, well, no, they want to communicate to their own social networks what they're giving and
Yeah.
why, and they
Right.
want to recruit others through their social
Yes.
network,
Yes.
or they are very open to being recruited by their peers, right, in
Yes.
the social
Peer-to-peer
network.
fundraising is huge.
Huge,
Absolutely.
right?
Yes.
And
It's
then of
definitely
course,
huge.
yeah,
Yep.
and within
Yeah.
that, then there's
So it's
text-based.
more like it's more relevant that, for nonprofits, that they create like the social social influencers, if you will,
Yeah.
that will help with that peer-to-peer fundraising rather than just like having a straight ask from the organization,
Yeah.
somebody that sits at the leadership and, oh yeah, I'm getting an email and, no, hey, but if Tosca asks me to give, I'm going to be much more likely to
Much more
give than
motivated.
if I just get an email from the organization.
Yeah.
So, but obviously the older donors, the baby boomers, and somewhat the silent generation, they're still big donors right now because they have a little bit more of, disposable income
Disposable
than some
income.
of the younger folks.
Yeah.
But again, this is why monthly giving is so relevant. And I am seeing that percentages of younger donors are giving at higher percentages, because they can make a difference with $5 or $10 a month. It doesn't have to
Nice.
be the $100,
No,
$100 gifts or what have you. So
that's nice. Yeah.
yeah.
So because we well, maybe one question before I get to my last one, which is to what extent do you see nonprofits in your client base struggle still today, or is that struggle over basically to move towards that more social fundraising model? And that's just going to be my shorthand for peer-to-peer social network based fund. Do you see them struggling from a point of view of mindsets or adjusting their systems and processes for fundraising? Because 5 to 10 years ago, when I used to do a little bit of research with others on that, we saw NGOs really struggling of moving away from the broadcasting model to a two-directional
Mhm.
communication
Yeah, I mean, again, it's sometimes it's a mindset, right? And you see this especially with organizations that have leaders who've been there forever.
forever.
Because but it's sometimes it's also resources. There's a lot of like turnover in fundraisers
Yeah.
and they move around a lot. So you might have just set up this social, peer-to-peer network and then they leave and so it's a little bit of a mix of that.
Okay.
But yes, as fundraisers, as we need to do everything, right? So that's, but that's why having some recurring revenue coming in will give you a little bit more breathing to space to say, okay, hey, and again, this is the beauty of having some of these monthly donors. They can become your social ambassadors,
Of course.
right? So, but you got to invite them to do that, right? So, and I think that's kind of like sometimes like, okay, sometimes it's almost like they sit in different buckets and they
Mm,
don't think about that as like, well, hey, because they're so invested, right?
mm,
They're making a continued, monthly gift that they really care about this organization. So make sure that you then, invite them to help out or share their story and I think that's
yeah.
kind of like once you start getting some testimonials from them that they are willing to share that. And, you can put that on social media, you can put that on a website,
Yeah.
you can
Yeah. Right.
share that with
So,
others.
so I mean, you hear constantly that NGOs and nonprofits say, "Yeah, our donor pool continues to be aging
Decreasing.
and
Yes.
relatively very old." Um, should we expect that that will always be a problem and may actually lead to the demise of a bunch of organizations? And similarly with the child sponsorship problem, that has been plateauing and declining for, I believe, I'm not sure, you tell me, for at least a decade, if not longer, right? Are these so the problem of the aging donor pool, is that a chronic problem that nonprofits will always struggle with? And is child sponsorship on its way out, basically?
Well, so you're asking two questions. So one is like,
Yeah.
I guess the reality is like younger donors are going to get older at some point, right?
Right.
So I think that's like, so they will feed into that. Okay, the kids, they don't have kids at home anymore, so now they may have a little bit more disposable income, right? So I think there is that. I guess the question is like, are they willing? Again, they have a choice. Do they want to give time? Do they want to give, money? So the trend may be they have less time and they have more money to give. So maybe they will start becoming the baby boomers of tomorrow. Um, and child sponsorships. Again, it all depends on, looking at it and maybe instead of the old-fashioned way where as a sponsor you would get like a letter from your child and whatever, and you did share that with your own kids, right? Because child sponsors tend to be families with kids,
Yeah, yeah,
because then they can say, hey, or here's what's going on with somebody who's your age. And again, maybe more like social and maybe more interactive, and instead of getting a letter you might get a video or whatever. But again, it's more intense to do that. Um, so I'm not sure if it's totally going away, but you may have to change the way you present the relationship when it
yeah,
comes to
that's for
these child
sure.
sponsors, right?
That's for sure. But you
So
think it will always exist as a category, and the same for animal sponsorship, of course, but maybe at a slightly lower in the mix of giving products,
yes.
if I can say it like that, it will maybe be take up a smaller space in
Yeah,
compared
it may be,
to
and
20
again,
years
you can
ago.
also look at it like if the other monthly donors grow, then yes, it will start taking a smaller space, right? And we're seeing that like some of these child sponsorship organizations have started like one monthly donor program or multiples
Yeah,
where they don't necessarily have to have that constant feed of specific sponsors, or where they actually have like some cases they have kids choosing the sponsors rather than the sponsors choosing the kids.
nice.
So there's a lot of variation in
In
that
fact,
coming.
I think
Yeah,
I saw an ad for World Vision
World Vision,
where
yes,
the child chooses
chooses
the
the sponsor.
donor
Yep, yep,
the other way around, which I thought was a really
yep,
healthy
yep, yes,
turning
right,
the what?
turning the tables. Yep.
Turning the table. Thank you for that. Erica, we've talked for a long time. We better bring this to a close, but it's been really interesting. It brought up some new thoughts for me. So where should people go if they want to learn more about your body of work, your consulting offers, your thought leadership?
And resources. Yeah, go to my website, adirectsolution.com,
Okay,
adirectsolution.com.
that's the
Great
best
free
place.
resources.
Free resources. I spotted them, and those are always worth grabbing, as we would say here in America. So, thank you, Erica, for all your insights. It's been really fascinating, and thank you for educating us. And thank you, listeners. If you found this podcast episode to be stimulating, then be sure to check out some of my other episodes. You can find these on my website, fiveoaksconsulting.org. That is with the number 5, but also on my YouTube channel. And one of the things you'll also find on my website is my newest offer. If you've been wanting to have an advisory call with me, but don't have the budget right now for a longer term consultation process, you can now book a one-off advisory call with me directly through my website. Again, that is fiveoaksconsulting.org with the number 5. Subscribe to my email if you will, so that you'll always be the first in the know when a new episode or a new blog post comes out. So with that, I'm saying goodbye. See you next time at NGO Soul and Strategy.